Welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here today to support the conference. Those of you who were here yesterday will know that I was fortunate enough to chair the planning day, and a good day we had too, with a lot of local authorities actually here to contribute to the programme that we had on. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a solicitor and a consultant in renewable energy and low carbon, specialising in local authority and public sector projects. And I work on a whole range of different things, including solar, but have spent some considerable time, as David says, actually working in this sector. And a lot of the views, if you like, that I've developed come from my time in Cornwall that David mentioned. Between 2009 and 2010, I was the director of the Green Cornwall programme and one of the architects of that programme, which was one of the leading programmes at the time for the development of civic and community energy. And indeed, it's that area that I want to focus on today. But I should warn you, even though I'm Welsh, I'm actually an adopted Yorkshireman now. I'm from Leeds, and so best forewarned is forearmed, as we say in Yorkshire. So let's have a look at that was the other thing, sorry. What we need is plain speaking. Plain speaking is what we're going to get in this last session, and I hope you'll react well to that. Okay, let's talk about the community energy strategy then. And I think the starting point is that the situation in the UK is very different to elsewhere, and particularly in Europe. And I was a local government lawyer for many years in-house, and we always had that years ago, 15, 20 years ago, where people used to talk about the European legal system and say, oh, they've got powers of general competence and all the rest of it. And I used to say, yes, but with respect, the European system is different to the system in the UK, because we didn't have powers of general competence, we didn't have the same constitutional protection and all the rest of it. And in fact, it's the same now with energy, in the sense of in neighbouring European countries, there's already a decentralised energy system. In many ways, you could say there's a culture of generating energy from small generations locally, using it locally. We don't have that system in the UK. It's not here. We have a centralised energy system dominated by the big six and National Grid and the DNOs and the other players. And the government therefore wants to move us towards the more decentralised system. But I think there's a long way to go. Even though we've got the Climate Change Act, we've got the targets and the policy framework, which we've heard a fair bit about today, we've still got a long way to go. And I think that one of the reasons why we don't have more renewables in operation in the UK is public perception and public awareness. And this is certainly something I learnt in Cornwall, but is also fueled by misleading reports from a hostile press. So I think the starting point is, how can we get more community energy? The starting point is, how can we effectively warm communities up so they're more comfortable with the concept of renewables, and do that, of course, in the context in which we are, which is not having a decentralised system. And I think community energy will only really be achieved when two goals are reached. I think the first is that there is a wider acceptance of renewables in the community generally, and secondly, that good quality community projects come forward and are promoted, if you like, for development. But I think there's too much emphasis on the latter and not enough emphasis on the former. And I've always been of the view that it's the government's responsibility to try and persuade people what the positive aspects of renewables actually are. And I think that's a really important point. It's a good common strategy, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the starting point is the renewable, the community energy strategy, and that's starting to move forward this position. But I think that the government concedes in that strategy that community energy is underdeveloped in the UK and that European models are better, and that's where we sort of want to get to. And when you read the detail of it, it talks about these 4 aspects: electricity use, better management of energy demand, more efficient collective purchasing of energy, and it looks at the issues and the barriers, but I don't get a good sense that it really knows what the actual solution to that is. And I think that I have learnt over my time in talking to the community groups and talking to local authorities that are quite closely linked to them, of course, because they're all part of the same triangle, if you like, that there's certain things that are specifically difficult for community projects coming forward. Their inability, if you like, to form proper groups with the right commitment is one part of it. Not universally so, but certainly that's one of the issues. Then you've got the issue about preparing a proper business case. You've got issues in terms of how to apply for planning permission, how to identify funding streams, how to borrow money. All of that sort of thing is in there. And these are central themes, if you like, that are running through this. And that's perhaps the reason why we haven't seen more projects coming forward. But the view the government's community energy strategy takes, there's the quote on the screen there, is that in order to get more public ownership of renewables, in order to get the public involved in renewables, the way to do it should be to try and get the commercial sector, if you like, to pass on some of the ownership of its projects to the public. Now, I'm not against share offers or crowdfunding or all these different things that can happen, but I do think that should be voluntary. I don't think it should be mandatory. And of course, the sting in the tail of the quote there was that if it doesn't happen by 2015, then the government would actually consider legislating. So in other words, we'll force you to do this if you don't do it voluntarily. And I think there's 2 reasons for this approach. The first, as I've said, is that DEC thinks this will increase public ownership and meet its target in relation to public ownership. And secondly, it'll help win over the public and sort of garner further support in relation to renewable energy projects in general. And I don't disagree with those points, certainly not the latter. Crowdfunding has shown that, I think, that if you want to get people engaged in renewables, the best way is to sell them a stake in something, to get them actively involved in it. But I think you have to ask yourself whether the approach in the community energy strategy is actually the right way to do it, i.e. to complicate already complicated commercial transactions and effectively add another layer of complexity in terms of some ownership transfer at the same time. So I think that that begs the question, doesn't it? Are there better ways of achieving what DEC wants to achieve? Don't get me wrong, I want community energy. Most of you probably want to see some community energy. The issue here is how we get there and whether the approach that we're being given in the community energy strategy is in fact the right one. But not just that, it's whether it will be effective, whether it will actually work. That's perhaps the key. So what sort of alternative strategies have we got? Well, I said a moment or two ago that my preference would be to have a properly funded national communications strategy for renewable energy, funded by the government, promoted by the government. And you might wonder what the caption on the slide is there, but I use as an example to you the switching off of the analogue TV signal, which happened recently, as you might remember, when it went digital. And the government was very worried about a whole variety of sections of the populace not getting the idea about this, particularly old people and all the rest of it. And so it ran a £200 million value programme of national advertising to try and make sure everyone was aware what was going on. And the worst thing that was going to happen was your telly was going to go off. I compare that with Green Deal. Don't go there, you might say, but let's just use it as an analogy. Green Deal is supposedly, according to the government, the biggest regeneration project since the Second World War. How much budget did it have for comms? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I think that demonstrates it needs to get its priorities right in terms of what it's doing. I don't accept for a moment that there can't be some form of national comms strategy to persuade people about the value of renewables. In other words, to try and counteract the hostile press, the Daily Mail, and all the other things that we've already heard about. But anyway, let's be realistic. The government's not going to do it. It's not going to pay for it to be done. So there's got to be other ways to do it. And I suppose we've got to talk, therefore, about how we're going to overcome some of those barriers and get some of these projects actually delivered. So I think my proposal, if you like, is to say, what other ways can we do it that don't involve interfering with the commercial marketplace, which effectively would affect achieving the government's targets, emissions reduction and all that sort of stuff. And I think my answer is what the communities actually want. They don't necessarily want ownership of big schemes in their area. They want more of their own schemes. They want more of their schemes for their community, and that might be a church hall roof, it might be a new boiler in a community hall, it might be a wind turbine in a school field, that sort of thing. And I think that can be achieved by a relatively modest programme. And the question is, what role, I think, the private sector might have in relation to the delivery of that sort of programme. Now, when I got down to Cornwall, I decided, there I was, in charge of this Green Cornwall programme, developing the programme. It took a while to get my feet on the table, work out what it was all about. And I decided, or concluded, if you like, that there was three aspects, three prongs to the job that I had. And one was to sort out the council's assets and land and all that, and put renewables on everything we could and improve its energy efficiency and so on. Feature two of the role was to try and help facilitate the community in the community groups to do more energy schemes themselves, because that obviously benefits the whole area. And the third element of my role was the rest, if you like. So you've done the local authority, you've done the community, the rest is the private sector, the wider economy, if you like. And that might be community infrastructure levy, it might be special planning documents, that sort of thing, but things to help it all along. But the truth is, I never got off first base. If I hadn't tied a rope around my leg, they'd never have got me back. I was there in trying to sort out the council's assets, and a year later I was still doing it, and we never got to the community part of it. But the idea of facilitating the community to do things itself, I think, is a very powerful one. And that led me to the proposal, if you like, to set up some form of industry-led voluntary scheme to promote community energy, but fundamentally to promote a different type of project, that is smaller individual community projects, not the larger commercial ones. And the idea for this would be that renewable energy developers would make contributions to a fund, if you like, let's put it that way, and essentially those might be based on capacity. That it doesn't matter what the technology is, because it's not just about solar in many ways. It's about the broader picture. And if that, of course, could then be applied with commercial discipline to get more schemes actually delivered, then hopefully that would win over deck in terms of how they're going to achieve their goal, and essentially give us a different way of actually getting there. Now, there's different ways, obviously I'm a lawyer, there's different ways you could set this up, whether it's a not-for-profit or non-profit distributing, whether it's an UpSEE or a community interest company or whatever. It doesn't really matter what its form is, but the idea is that body would work in partnership with the community groups. And this morning it was mentioned, of course, that Jonathan Porritt is working with the Community Energy Coalition, which is a group of third sector and community bodies that are helping advise the government on this. Also the local authorities, because they've got to be in this. They're the other part of the tripod. You can't really do something with the community without involving the local authority or vice versa. And there might be roles for others. There might be roles for universities or the broader third sector, or a whole range of other potential people who might have something to actually contribute with this. But the essential idea is to take a group of people who have have an idea, they want to put solar on the church roof or whatever it is. They've got the commitment to get together and want to do it, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do the business case, they don't have to get the planning permission, they don't have to borrow the money or identify the funding streams or whatever else it is that they need to do. I'm not actually talking about equity funding the projects, I'm talking about facilitating the projects coming forward. And of course the other fundamental point is I'm talking about, with it obviously being an industry-led scheme, I'm talking about it applying commercial discipline. So it's not like we spend a whole year talking about what we might do and it's all woolly and fuzzy and we're all happy clappy and all that nonsense. I'm talking here about having an appraisal system of the projects that have the commitment and are going to get it done, and making sure that the maximum bang for the buck is obtained from the projects that actually come forward. What would actually be in this then? Who would benefit from it? Well, I think the community sector would benefit because, as I've said, at last there'd be some targeted paid-for assistance that's geared up to actually help them deliver those projects. In Cornwall there was a huge transition town, there is a huge transition towns movement, if you like, and I met loads and loads of groups who said, we want you to help us do something, but that help wasn't really available. And the benefit to the community is all they have to do is come up with the ideas and have the gumption to push them forward, i.e. be serious about it, and it would actually potentially get done. For the local authorities want to help their communities. They are, remember, the democratically elected body for the area, and they have huge links to all aspects of the community. But times are tough in the public sector, as you probably know, thanks to George Osborne, all the cuts and more cuts, and they're not finished yet. More public services will be under threat in the years to come. And as a result, despite the fact that they might want to do something, and that was the idea of me mentioning the example in Cornwall Council wanted to help the community groups, it just didn't have the resource and the time to actually do it. And so this would give them a different way of assisting, maybe a bit of space in the town hall to host the officers, maybe it would be some administrative or overhead support, maybe it would be just lining up the community groups, but they'd be in there, not in a lead role, but something that they necessarily want to actually support. And this is the real question for you, isn't it? As the renewable energy industry, you say, well, hang on a minute, what's in it for us? Well, of course, there's a number of things that are in it for us, but the whole concept of this is, to put it crudely, it gets deck off your back and you won't get the legislation forcing you to sell off part of your projects, which is really what I'm trying to get to. But it's much broader than that. In a sense, we've talked about this issue about public perception, and what I learned again what I have learned through all the projects I've been involved in, is if you do it in a certain way and you apply certain disciplines to it, you can win over public perception. There's no doubt about that. And what I've tended to find is once you have won people over, they tend to stay on your side. So better relations with communities is a big thing, and this is particularly so for solar, where we want to see more deployment over the course of coming years. But it's also a chance to properly educate and influence people at local level, and of course that is sadly lacking. People are prejudiced. The amount of conversations I've had in the pub, I've got 4 kilowatts of solar on my roof back in Leeds, and every single time I mention to that, in any boozer in the country, the person I'm talking to turns around and goes, I was going to do that, but of course it all finished in 2011, didn't it? Honestly, it's true. And that perception has been ingrained in the populace, and we've got to do something about education and influence, and I think this is an excellent way of actually doing this. But there's another one as well, isn't there? We all want to find those areas where we can get planning consent, where we can find the right area to put our project and actually get it deployed. And of course, more intelligence as to what communities do support renewables and are amenable to that is actually very useful indeed, and would certainly come from this, and by definition from that potentially fewer objections to the projects we bring forward. So there's a lot in this for us, and I think it's just, for me, it's about thinking outside the box. It's about thinking something a little bit differently, and yes, it does involve giving some resources, but ultimately the question is, what do we get back for those resources, and what control do we have over how those resources are actually deployed? Now, we've heard a lot, haven't we, about public policy and about uncertainty in public policy and the potential damage of that uncertainty. And today we've had some excellent more examples of that. We had the FIT drop in 2011 that I've already referred to. Maybe there's another one coming in relation to ROCs. And of course, Nigel Farage is all over the TV. But I think that the point to make here is energy has become much more political, hasn't it? And I write about this in my newsletter all the time. So there's bits of point scoring going on, ministers saying this, what's happening within the coalition, and all the rest of it. I'm sure you're all aware of that. But the government wants to be seen to be on the side of the consumer, and cost of living is a big aspect of that debate. And so I think that we want to avoid more uncertainty, certainly in relation to the potential for more legislation coming towards us that might not be welcome. And so this is an excellent time to start thinking about how we can potentially steer off some of that and provide something that will have a genuine benefit all round and would deliver a win-win-win situation. And before I come on to my conclusions, I just want to mention, I did say that I do an analysis of the local authority energy sector on a weekly basis, and David and others help provide the data for that. If anyone's interested in those analyses, then I can certainly provide you with the details. I also do some work for an organisation called UpSEE that stands for the Association for Public Service Excellence. And UpSEE is a local authority owned body. It's a not-for-profit or non-profit distributing body that's owned by local authorities, and it's got about 250, 300 members. And it derived from a time when there used to be the old DLOs, if you remember them, direct labour organisations, and it runs functions like waste management, refuse collection, catering, cleaning, grounds maintenance, blue-collar stuff, as we'd refer to it. But it's very well supported by local authorities, and they've just started a new concept, and they've called it UpSEE Energy, and it's an energy collaboration. And I've worked for them as a consultant for the last 4 years, in both as an independent capacity and working as a subcontractor to UpSEE. And I know that that group of authorities are particularly well switched onto it. But I just wanted to share this with you. That collaboration has a vision, and the vision is the re-municipalisation of energy. I'll just run that past you again. The re-municipalisation of energy. And of course, energy was all run by the councils. You go back far enough, they used to run water, they run gas, they ran electricity. It was all civically owned if you go back 50, 60 years. But the leading local authorities want to get back to that position. They want to get to a position where they have their own energy services companies, their own ESCOs, where they have generation capacity. This is what we're trying to do in Cornwall, 6 5-megawatt solar farms, 6 wind farms, heat networks, all sorts of different things. And the idea is, ultimately, that generation would be passed on directly through retail means to the public. And of course, that's a threat to the big six as well. We heard of other threats earlier on. But the idea is everyone is now thinking about the price of energy, about how you use energy. And of course, for local authorities, what they're thinking about is the social value of energy. And you can only ever extract the full social value from electricity if you can sell it directly to the public. You can't get any social value by selling it wholesale through a PPA. It just doesn't work like that. And so a whole group of local authorities, there's 40 in this collaboration now, are all joining together to try and work on those concepts and what they can actually deliver. But none of this is going to happen until the public warm to renewable energy, they start accepting climate change a bit more seriously than they have to date. And I think that we need to give active consideration to the real reasons why public support's not there, what role everyone has in trying to remedy that. And even though I think the community energy strategy is an excellent first stab at opening that debate, I think it's got a long way to go before it can be finalised. Thank you very much.